Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Short while ago, I did a video entitled, "Can Someone Please Tell Me What Just Happened?" And in case you missed it or you want a quick refresher, I had sent a check to a friend of mine, and a couple of days later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and I didn't answer the call. And a couple of days in a row, that number called me. And finally, one day, I got the person on the phone call, and they said, "Is this Steve Lehto?" And I said, "Who's calling?" And the woman said, "Well, I'm calling from the security department of a bank." She names a bank. And I said, "Why would you be calling me? That's not my bank." And she said, "Well, you wrote a check." And she identified a check I had written. She knew who I made it out to. She knew how much it was made out for. She knew what bank it was drawn on. And she also knew what bank it was deposited into. Now, I didn't confirm any of that or admit any of that, but she told me these things. She goes, "We're just calling to confirm this is real." I said, "Why would you be calling me? I don't understand. I think this is a scam." And I kept saying it to her, "I think this is a scam. I think this is a scam." And I mentioned I actually recorded the phone call. I have a little digital recorder handy, and I recorded the phone call. And I've listened to it now several times to make sure that I got the story right, and I do. And so it was kind of weird because I wound up ending the phone call convinced it was a scam. Now, I want to add some facts here I did not mention previously. I had tried to get a hold of my friend that I'd written the check to, and I couldn't get a hold of him right away, so I shot my video, and then after the video went up, he called me, and we talked for a while. I want to let you know one funny thing. He is an attorney who spent decades representing a bank. That's how I met him. He knows bank law better than almost anybody I know, and probably better than anybody I know, and really, really nice guy, too. And he said, "Steve, there's a bit of a weird issue going on here." I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "They held that check that you wrote me for quite some time." I said, "When did they release it?" And he told me when they released it. And guess what? It got released the day that woman called me. So he said, I believe the phone call is real. Now, here's the weird part, is that after I hung that phone call up, I did call that bank that the woman claimed she was calling from. And I spoke to somebody over there, and I gave them the phone number, and they just said, "No, that woman does not work for us." So I thought, okay, that's strange. So then I called my bank, and I said, "Hey, I got this weird phone call. The other bank says it wasn't their people." They said, "Well, we can take steps to protect your bank account a little bit there, but we'll do what we can." But here's the weird thing. They did hold the check, and then they finally released it. And it's possible it's just a mere coincidence, but I got a ton of emails, comments, messages, all kinds of stuff. I've never gotten a reaction like the one I've gotten on this ever before. And a lot of people have been telling me all kinds of things, ranging from your computer's been hacked, somebody's actually planted virus spyware, and they've infiltrated your check writing program. And it's like, my check writing program is in here. And this is my check writer, okay? But I got several from people in the banking industry who said, "Steve, what's happening here is a thing called Know Your Customer." It's a law. Know Your Customer is a law. It's a thing they do now. And the government has told these federally regulated businesses that they've got to know their customers and watch out for things that are suspicious. And apparently it was suspicious that a guy in Michigan wrote a check to a person in another state, and the person in the other state then deposited the check into a branch that was in another state from the one in which they opened up their account in. And apparently a couple red flags went up, and that's what several people said to me in those emails. They said, what's going on here is these are routine checks. Someone's just following the Know Your Customer protocol. But here's the weird part, is the woman on the phone never did anything to try to convince me she was real other than to say, "I assure you I am real." And the weird thing about this is that English was not her first language. And I'm not being racist here. Every time I mention someone who doesn't speak English well, I get people going, "Steve, you're racist." No, I'm just talking about people who can't speak English. So if you are a bank, okay, I'm speaking to you, bank. If you're a bank and you're going to outsource important phone calls like this to call centers where English is a second language for the employees, you've got to give them a better flow chart to work from. So it's got to be introduce yourself. Ask them, are you so-and-so? Did you write this check? But then it's got to say, if they doubt you or ask, are you real? How do you prove you're real? You've got to give them something to say. Here's my name. Here's my employee ID number. Here's a number you can call me back at. Okay? Because I did call the bank that she claimed she was working for. I gave them the phone number she called me from. They said, that's not one of ours. That's not one of ours. So ironically, her bank that she works for, I believe, disavowed her, just like a bad Mission Impossible thing. But on the other hand, I honestly believe now that she was working there. So figure that out. So there's the biggest problem here, is that they give these call center employees work flowchart dialogues. I don't know what you call it, script. And it probably does have different, if they say this, do this. If they say this, do this. But the weird part is that they, when I called them, said no. Now, I had people saying, Steve, not only do they have access to your check writing software, but they've also hacked your computer. For all you know, when you went to look up his bank's website, they spoofed the website. People have got very, very active imaginations. Like I said, really what's going on here is his bank saw an out-of-state check from somebody, and I'd never written him a check before, which is another fact that the woman actually threw into the conversation. But how would she know that? How would she know that based on just having a check in her hands? And I had people saying, but Steve, maybe he's got a disgruntled ex-wife. Well, who doesn't? No, just kidding. No. The guy, like I said, is an attorney who worked for the bank, an actual bank, for decades. So he called me. We talked about this. We went through this. And after we confirmed the fact that the check funds at his end got released the same day the woman talked in circles with me, he said, Steve, I'm convinced that was a real phone call. And it's just weird that when you called the bank back, they couldn't confirm that she was their employee. But he said, I believe it's real. So just in case you're curious, his bank is listed among the top 10 banks in America by size. Very, very large bank. My bank is not much smaller, but a little bit smaller. But like I said, when I challenged the woman and said, I don't believe you, I think this is a scam, she said, I assure you, I'm real. I'm not doubting that you're real, okay? I know I'm speaking to a human being, although nowadays you never know. But she kept saying, I assure you, I am real. And that's not terribly reassuring. Somebody you don't know calls you out of the blue. And by the way, I had actually seen this number pop up on my caller ID for several days in a row. I reverse searched it. And one of the things that popped up, it said, this phone number is a scam phone call. Now, I don't know who reported it to whom on the internet. Who knows how the internet works? But the point simply is that I told her that. I said, I reverse searched your phone number, and it says this is a scam. I assure you, I am real. I assure you, I am real. And I hate to say this, but at one point I actually said to her, one of the reasons I doubt that this phone call is real is I go, your English is so bad. And she said, well, English is not my native language. And I said, okay, but you do understand that I don't believe that you're really calling me from a bank. I assure you that I am. So my pro tip here is I am 99.99999% certain that this was a legitimate phone call from his bank, okay? Is there a chance? A whole bunch of weird coincidences would have to pop up for that to work. But the most important thing here is that it lines up with when they released the funds. And you might say, but Steve, why did they release the funds if you gave no information? Well, it might just be that the time had elapsed for anything else to happen, but I don't know. I've listened to the phone call that I recorded, and like I said, she said, is this Steve Lehto? And I said, who's calling? That's not an affirmative answer. And then when she said, we have a check that was written, that was signed by Steve Lehto, and that was made out to this gentleman, and here's the amount, and here's your bank, and here's his bank. Yeah, I understand. It's possible that if somebody had that check in their hands, well, yeah, they'd get a lot of that information. But then she also said, and you have never written him a check before that was deposited into our bank. Now, that could be a lucky guess. It could be. But like I said, my friend who worked for decades in the banking industry, in fact, he worked so long in the bank that I knew him when he was working at the bank before the bank that swallowed up the bank that he worked at. But that's what happens with banks. You open up a checking account one day, and a week later they come by and they're changing the signs at the bank. Oh, don't worry, your checks are still good, but it's now a different bank. And I've had that happen to me several times, and it happened to him while he was working there. But he's retired now. He's retired now. He doesn't work for the bank anymore. But instead, he gets to deal with stuff like this because I'm going, you understand, if this is legit, it's a ridiculous way to run the show. The fact that they actually have somebody whose English is horrible calling from a number that the bank doesn't even recognize as their own and saying things like, I assure you I'm real. No, this is not a scam. You know how many scammers have called me and I've said this is a scam and they hang up on me or they yell at me or something. But for them to go, no, it's not a scam. That's actually one of the things that they don't do. This is a scam. Usually they just hang up and move on. I assure you I am real. So what we've learned today is I asked, can someone please tell me what just happened? We've figured it out. That's what happened. I got a bunch of great emails on the topic. Thank you very much. And I got some from guys and gals who worked in banks who said, I had a couple say, Steve, here's my profile. You can look me up. This is the bank I work at. I'm telling you what's happening. And it's the know your customer rules and the algorithms, and a couple flags were thrown up. And I had several people say, Steve, it depends. But if it was an out-of-state check or an out-of-state deposit, oh, guess what? It was both. It was both. So that's cool. The other thing I can tell you is that the video now has over 1.2 million views, which is huge for my channel. I've had 5 or 6 videos hit the million view mark, but this one got 500,000 views in 24 hours. Never had that happen before, never. But when the video first went up and the title was, can someone please tell me what just happened? One of the first comments I got in response to that was, you just put up a video with a stupid title. That's what just happened. To which I have to say, well, the video with that title has now been viewed 1.2 million times. How stupid can that title be? So, like I said, though, I am now convinced the call was legit, but the bank really needs to clean up their act. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law.
Every path has a few puddles.